What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sitdown. As always, if you enjoy this video and you're watching us on YouTube, do me a favor and hit the like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sitdown video. Also, make sure that notification bell's turned on so you never miss any future sit-down show. If you're listening to us currently on our iTunes, Spotify, or Google Pods platform, welcome in. I always enjoy hearing from all the audio folks as well. Do me a favor and leave us a detailed review and leave us 5 stars. It really helps the growth of the show. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back with another weekly episode, and it's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for another new show, and we got a great show planned for you today. We're going to bring on one of my favorite people in the mob genre history world. We'll talk to him in just a second. Before we do that, though, I want to tell all of you about my bookie. Now, we've all been there before, right? We want to go gamble. We want to go play some dice or some roulette. And then that casino trip gets canceled because, again, real life always calls. Well, my bookie's here. It's new and improved online casino. Is ready to change the game for you. You can dive in right now to truly realistic casino experience games featuring the latest in slots, jackpots, and live dealer action. And guess what? It's all from the comfort of your own home. Now, my bookie's going to deliver it straight to you. Like I said, live dealer. You can bet on sports. Whatever you're looking to do, my bookie has you covered. It's that simple. Now, you get a Las Vegas experience when the action's in your hands. And the best part is you don't even need to wear pants, right? And that's great. I mean, we can do everything at home now. We don't have to shop anymore. We can get it right from Amazon. We can even gamble now straight from home. You can take advantage of things like weekly blackjack tournaments and a brand new collection of high-end games for a chance at real cash rewards. Do what I did and go start your adventure right now at the MyBookie Casino. And it begins today with a generous sign-up bonus using promo code SITDOWN. Again, that's promo code SITDOWN to secure yourself a really nice 50% match on deposits up to $1,000. Plus, you're going to get a $10 casino chip to use directly right now. Again, that's promo code SITDOWN. When you create your account, you get a 50% match on deposits up to $1,000 plus that casino chip. And that's not all. The revamped loyalty program ensures that you'll be showered with rewards, including free spins, cashback offers, and a host of plenty of VIP perks. Again, the more you play, the more you win. Play anytime, play anywhere. It's my bookie. Click the link on the pinned comment and get involved right now. All right, guys, we are back. A new episode, and I am excited for this one. You know, often on my channel, I spend a lot of time talking about New York, right? John Gotti, Vinny Basciano, Lucky Luciano, all these different folks over the world of the Mafia in New York. We've talked about Philadelphia. We've talked about some Boston stuff. We went to Tampa, but we haven't went to the very interesting city of Kansas City. And when we think of the Mafia, most people don't think of Kansas City, do they? Well, today we're going to talk about it finally. I get requests all the time. When are you going to do Kansas City? We're going to try to get through it today and have some fun. And we're going to bring on really the professional when it comes to the Kansas City Mafia. It's the great Gary Jenkins, host of the Gangland Wire podcast. Gary, I've been in this space about 2 years. I've watched a lot of your content. You are really a gentleman. You've done a great job, I think, really highlighting this world and really the world of the mob in general. You're a retired police officer. We're going to get into your career a little bit, but I appreciate you coming on and educating us a little bit about people like Nick Civella. And I heard an FBI agent one time say that the Kansas City Mafia is an underrated, very violent group. A lot of people don't think about how violent this group was in the 70s. Thanks for coming on. I'm looking forward to learning more.
All right, Jeff. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And I want to I think one thing about your career that I find interesting is you present, like me, I've never been in the Mafia. I was never a cop. I'm just someone that, enjoys this stuff and found some success with it. But you have kind of an interesting career. I want to learn a little bit more about you. When you were growing up, whether you're a cop or a gangster, and I've talked to both, I always like to ask about your life. Like, what made you go the way you did? what was your life like early on in your your childhood? What was your family like?
Well, I grew up. I wouldn't say on a farm. I grew up working on a farm. We had farmland and we lived in town and commuted out to the country to work the farm. We had several hundred acres and was, had cows and calves and I hated farm work. I hated everything about it. I just told a story. It's 4th of July right now. One time I had to go out and dig thistles, which are bristly sticker plants that will take over a field. Take a shovel, go out and dig them up all day long for a penny a thistle. And I made $6 and something a couple of weeks before the 4th of July. Then I went into town and spent $6 on fireworks, and of course blew that up in about an hour. So
Right.
I touched a little bit about farm work. Hot, dirty, doesn't pay very well many times. But and I didn't like it. It's boring. So as soon as
So
I
you
turned
decided
18,
I'm going to go a different way with my life. I don't want to be, busting my
right.
back all day digging up thistles and other things. That makes sense. So was anyone in your, you mentioned kind of farming, but was anyone connected to you a police officer? What made you kind of
No.
pick that? Because, civil services back then a very rewarding career. I mean, it still is. I mean, it's a well-paying job. What made you pick that?
Well, I just always wanted to live that life of action. Every little boy's dream. I would have joined the military, but it just wasn't in the cards for me. And probably a good thing is I ended up having a child kind of early. As my son often tells me today, I saved your ass from Vietnam. And I said, you're probably right. I would have gone there and gotten killed right away. So that was out, but that, I still was not wanted that life of action. You got to get some kind of a job when you're young and you're married and you got a child. So I just got a job at a factory, a Ford plant putting together cars, which was, again, boring as hell. I mean, talk about boring. You put that same part on that motor every minute or less for 8 hours a day. And if you want to go to the bathroom, you got to get somebody to come over and let you go, unless it's your break time or lunchtime. And I hated that. But again, I didn't go to college. I just went right in and went right to work. And finally, in 1970, the Kansas City Police Department started advertising. They wanted to hire 350 more policemen. They wanted to increase the staff, the entire police department, by 350 people, and they were advertising all over the place. And so I said, heck, that'll be good. That'll be fun. That'll be like, I don't know. That'll be the action I've always wanted. So I started going, going through their hoops, jumping through their hoops, and let them do a background check on me and all that, and get myself back in shape, because back in those days I'd kind of let myself go, and I started jogging and got my weight down, and by 1971 September, I was ready to go, and they took me and I went to the police academy in
It's
September of
pretty interesting
1971.
because a lot of people spend their whole life just thinking that they're going to go do something and try something different, and they never actually ended up going to do it. And you decide pretty quick. That's kind of how I was too. And I'm still pretty young, but I'll just say this before we move on: if you want to go out and do something, go do it. Don't spend your whole life thinking about doing it. Go do it, because it'll generally be pretty good for you. I want to ask you. So one thing about Kansas City, I mentioned a lot of people when they think of the Mafia, they think of New York, they think of Las Vegas, stuff like that. But the Kansas City mob, was around, and really the imprint of it was around far before you were born. Even, I mean, it was something that in most times in the 1900s there was waves of immigration coming into the West Coast, the Midwest, the Northeast, and Kansas City developed, like many cities, an Italian population. And your area was on the north end. When you were a kid, coming up, even in your teenage years, your young adult years, what did you know about the underworld, if you will? Like, did you hear anything about it? Was it something that was, because again, one thing I noticed is a lot of these cities, and we saw this in the show Boardwalk Empire, there's always this underworld group that controls the political movements in Kansas City or Atlantic City or wherever. And that was no different there. So what do you know about these groups? Did you know anything about it?
To be honest, I knew nothing about it. I had no concept of the Mafia, of organized crime. I may have had some vague memory when they had the Kefauver hearings, and I was about 8 or 9 years old, but I can't really call one specifically. I didn't really think about the mafia. To be in law enforcement, I only thought about driving a police car and carrying a gun and making calls and interrupting armed robberies and those kinds of action oriented things. I never thought about, the mafia or who they were, what they did.
But the mafia wasn't, I guess in Kansas City, it wasn't as like New York where like it's kind of in your face and you see it all the time. And I've noticed some of the people I've talked to in some of the West Coast, Midwest areas, it's not as potent and in your life as you would think. But as you know, and you've done a great job providing this history over the years, is like I said, this goes back many years. And, first starts as the Black Hand, which we've heard those words a lot, this extortion scheme where, these Italian people, were extorting their own people. And we'll talk about Nick Civella in a bit. I mean, he came up kind of fighting against the Black Hand. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, we had large Italian, primarily from Sicily, population into what we affectionately call Little Italy or Columbus Park now. Moved in there and had shops and stores and produce stands and produce, carts that they'd push produce around out in the neighborhoods and that kind of thing, because the larger population, the Irish, they didn't want the Italians to let them in to be the policemen or the firemen. They had that sewed up. And the English had all the banking and the primary businesses sewed up. So the new immigrants, they start their own stores, they called them spaghetti joints, their own restaurants down in the North End. And they had the Black Hand. They were preying, just like every other city, they were preying on their other countrymen or paisans, if you will. And Nick Civella did come up through that. As a young man, his dad supposedly was victimized as a shopkeeper by Black Hand because they extorted money from their own. And so that's one reason they say that he kind of rebelled against those first older men. As he came up, he had a small gang that stole tires. Stealing tires was a big deal back in those days. It seems kind of weird today, but that was kind of the mother's milk of crime activity, was stealing tires. And then a mob guy had a tire outlet that he would then sell those stolen tires out to the regular other people, or wheels and tires and that kind of thing. So that was, had kind of a humble start, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we see in many other cities, the 20s really kind of enhance and create what we now know as the mafia in America, right? Because of prohibition. And look, the Midwest was a very fertile area for prohibition, right? I mean, There was a lot of bootlegging going on there. One name that I've heard a lot about over the years is this guy called John Lazia,
Right.
who really kind of enhances kind of the political wheel. And one name you hear a lot about it in Kansas City political history is this guy, Tom Pendergrast. Mm-hmm. What do you know about him? Because he kind of came across to me as like I mentioned Boardwalk Empire, like the Nucky Thompson of Kansas City, right? He kind of aligns with the Italians because they don't really have much of a voice. And you mentioned all these other groups like the Irish or the English, they had voices. Tom Pendergrast was the quasi voice, right, for them?
Well, he was really the voice of the working man Irish and the voice of the working people in Kansas City, the blue collar boss, and he could get the vote out. He knew early on. He opened a bar. His brother, actually older brother, opened a bar around the packing plants. Packing plants were huge. This kind of where they bring the cows that have been fed out down in Kansas and down in Texas up to Kansas City. So the packing plants were a huge employer, a lot of blue collar work. And he had his older brother had a barn and got into city politics, because if you want to advance your people and yourself and you're an immigrant, you got to deal with politics and politicians. And that's your route up out of the bottoms, up out of that's where they're in the West bottoms. They route up out of the bottoms for the Irish. And so Pendergast, he was Irish himself. He got into politics and he started organizing things. And during the Depression, he was like the only safety net that people had. There was no welfare system to speak of. And, they talk about Al Capone had soup kitchens in Chicago during the Depression. Well, Pendergast, he provided jobs. He was able to get people city jobs. He was able to get people county jobs, other businesses that he had, influence with. He helped people get jobs. People would line up outside of his office, and maybe he'd give them a chit to go get a container of coal for their stove, or some food or something like that. He was, he was the welfare system or the safety net for a lot of poor people. And then those people, when it came time to vote, they were told how to vote because he organized all those wards, not the silk stocking wards, but all the rest of the wards, and got his own people in there as the ward captains and the precinct captains. And when the vote came time to get the vote out, he was a power to be dealt with by the larger culture. They had to deal with Pendergast. That's the only way the people that have power will ever deal with people that don't have power, is they get some political power. Then you got something going. So that's when then the Italians were a little later on, but they started organizing down in the North End, and Pendergast had that organized. But John Lazia, this guy, he was smooth. He was a criminal. He was a member of the Mafia, and out of that organization there, which came out of the Black Hand during Prohibition, they kicked, they, just like in other cities, they didn't kill them all off, but they kicked a lot of them out and took over the local family and made all that money in Prohibition. And then they started getting into politics, and John Lazia was smooth. He was gentlemanly. He was handsome. He was not scary, but yet, he could have you killed too. And so he and Pendergast, then he forced Pendergast to deal with him, just like Pendergast forced other people to deal with the Irish. Well, this brash, attractive, charismatic young Italian named John Lazia forced Pendergast to deal with him and took away control of the first ward, particularly, and the second ward mostly. And that gave the mob a big say-so in politics in Kansas City.
And one thing we know about all these, these political people, right? These people like Pendergast, is they're doing a lot of legitimate business. They're Robin Hood type of figures. They're looked upon as kings, but we all know they're all doing illegal things as well. All the stuff, the card game, that's all run by them. So Lazia is kind of this good-looking guy who's kind of the voice and the front for the Italian folks. He kind of slots in with this Pendergast, but quickly we realize Lazia is murdered, right? And this protege of his, Charlie Binaggio, he kind of assumes the Lazia role, right?
He does. Charlie Binaggio was an interesting guy. I just did my last documentary, which I can't get him play for, but I did a story about Binaggio helping the Pendergast organization, and it really was helping President Harry Truman make sure that a 5th district congressman didn't get reelected or didn't get past the primary. And Binaggio, he was like Lazia, he was a mob boss, but he was smooth and well-spoken and urbane and dressed well, lived in the right neighborhood. He didn't live over in the North End in Little Italy. He lived out south in the silk stocking area. And he started cultivating politicians all the way up to the state level. And there were other people under him, his running partner, a guy named Charlie Gargata, and they will eventually be killed together, the murder of the two Charlies. But Gargata was out handling all the rough stuff, the street stuff. Binaggio was handling all the silk stocking stuff, all the velvet glove stuff. And it was like the perfect combination of people. They had actually a boss. They had a couple of different bosses during this time, a guy named Palmatier, I think, and then Rizzo. They didn't really go down in history for some reason, but they were, purportedly the boss. But these guys were doing all the work and making the Kansas City mob really a national organization to be dealt with, especially Binaggio.
Right, very prominent. Before we get into kind of the two Charlies murder, I want to ask you a question, and this is something we don't really hear much about with New York and Philly and some of these other places, but during the 30s, you had the rise of the outlaw, right? The Pretty Boy Floyd types, right? So Pretty Boy Floyd, as of like 33, 34, is considered public enemy number one in this country as far as bank robberies. What was was there any like, was there any connection to him with like the mob? How did they feel about people like Pretty Boy Floyd? I'm always curious
Well,
about that. It's not something we talk about too much, but in this area, it's obviously.
it's a little bit like I was researching Chicago once, and Joey Iupa back during these times, he was kind of like a liaison with these traveling bank robbers because they were out making money. Mob, they like to have those contacts, and they got contacts in every area of life. Well, in Kansas City, John Lazia, the Union Station massacre, if anybody's ever heard of that, is like this is the nexus, shows the nexus of those kinds of traveling bank robber criminals in the 30s and the Kansas City Mafia. Johnny Lazia always held court at a restaurant, if you will. You always knew how to find Johnny Lazia at the Fred Harvey restaurant in the Union Station. Well, at that time, Pretty Boy Floyd. All of a sudden, I'm gonna get my people mixed. Yeah, Pretty Boy Floyd and Adam Richetti, and there was another guy, Warren Miller. They were all traveling bank robbers during this time, and they wanted to break a guy named Frank Nash out of jail. He had been in prison up in Leavenworth. He had escaped. He was down in Little Rock or Hot Springs, Arkansas, which was a Midwest kind of a place where there was gambling and mob guys and people on the run. And it's kind of a, it was a no man's land, if you will, down in Arkansas. And everybody went down there to gamble and bet on the horse races down there. And they had a little casino. So Frank Nash is down there, and they arrest him down there. A couple of FBI agents and the chief of police from Oklahoma, who I think he maybe had one of the warrants on him. They arrested Frank Nash, and they brought him through Kansas City. They were just going to take him back to Leavenworth because he was escaped from there. And Pretty Boy Floyd and this Richetti and Miller all were in Kansas City to pry him loose, if you will, from these agents that were taking him back to Leavenworth. And they had to go see, the story was, and I think this Frank Unger that wrote a pretty good book on it, really they got some old FBI files that it appears that they went to John Lazia and to get his approval, because they knew you didn't do something like this that was big in Kansas City unless Lazia approved it. And so they got his approval, even supposedly provided them with a car, the cool car, to get away when it was all over after they got Nash freed. And so that's kind of how they work together. If you were going to do something important in a city like Kansas City or Chicago, you better go to the local Mafia guys and get it approved, and probably give them a piece of the action and work with them a little bit on it.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, like I said, you don't really deal with that too much in New York, at least during these times. But but again, they all had crews that were working under them that weren't at time, so it makes sense.
Yeah,
you mentioned the two Charlies hit. Lazia is eventually killed, and he's killed by his underboss, right? Is that correct?
Probably. That's kind of the supposition. It was never really solved. I don't think there was barely any investigation into it, because it was back during the 30s. He was killed by there's a guy named Tootie Lesko that had his own big crew here, and they suspect maybe it was him, but he didn't really move up that much. It's one of those really mysterious kind of murders. His own underboss, I believe his driver that night, Charlie Carollo, drove off. I mean, he told him to drive off as these guys ran toward the car and started shooting at him because he was hit. And because they had his wife in the car too, Lazia's wife, and he yelled at Charlie to drive off. He ends up ascending to be the boss after that. You always kind of think, who's the next guy is going to be the boss?
Right.
Who benefits from this? But to be honest, nobody really. I've never read any real good definitive answer to who ordered that hit. But he goes on to be the boss, and then Gargada and Binaggio were these guys. These are up and comers back in those days. And, several other guys, and Thomas Highway had great names, Black Louis Congolosi and Highway Simone, Tom Highway Simone, the cool names like that. So, they're just the usual brash young mobsters that have different pieces of action going, involved in the gambling. They hit a guy named Wolf Reinman because he's got a big bunch of slot machines over out in the county, and he won't give him a piece of the action. So Wolf Reinman appears one day at some kind of a business over here in Kansas City, mainly stayed out in the county outside the city limits, and was really well connected with the Jackson County Sheriff, who was getting a piece of the action, of course, from these slot machines at all the roadhouses out in the county. And he comes over to Kansas City one day, and some like 1950 or 51, and somebody pulls up next to him, jumps out and pops him and kills him. And what was kind of interesting about it was I think this was right before the murder of their two Charlies, right around that time. There's a lot of action happened right around 1950, 51. Killed him. They drive the car off. It was a brand new car, and it was a hit car because they had bought it down in St. Louis and registered it to a fictitious name at the address of the Bartender and Waiters Union in Kansas City. And it had some hidden compartments in it that you could put guns in. But the guy had a wreck after he drove off. He was, frantically trying to make sure he got away and nobody was behind him. And something happened. He wrecked it and it wouldn't drive away. So he had to get out and run off. And they never caught him. Never figured out who it was that hit Reinman, but they did recover that car with these hidden compartments in it. And that's how they know that this phony registration that they had. So pretty sophisticated kind of thing. Chicago, they got caught with a hit car just like that one time when they were running a surveillance. I think Milwaukee Phil or somebody like that was in the car, and they had hidden compartments for guns. So that's some of that was going on, and Gargata was, he was probably, that either was him or he made sure that got done. Binaggio was trying to get the guy named Forrest Smith to be elected governor, and he was taking money from people that like Frank Costello. Frank Costello came to Binaggio's funeral. Money from Frank Costello, from some interest in Chicago, from the outfit, from other gamblers and other mobs around the country. And he was promising that he could deliver an open state for slot machines and gambling in the cities. He was going to get this governor elected, and then he was going to get some of the Kansas City Police Board replaced by the governor. So Kansas City would open up to be real friendly towards gambling, be more like trying to get it back like during the 30s. And he got the governor elected, but the governor, as we say down on the farm, pissed backwards on him and wouldn't do it. And it started coming out what was going on, this little plot he had, and the governor did appoint some new, more gambling-friendly police commissioners, but these guys now they're exposed. They can't get in and mess up with the vice squad and make sure certain people got in were the vice commander and the vice squad, manipulate things like that. They can't do that because there's too much heat on it. And they say more than likely that promise that he had after he took this money to get this governor elected, they suspicion that maybe he didn't own the governor like he said, and maybe he didn't really give him all that money. Maybe he kept a bunch of that money. Right. So there's a lot of that going on. And one night he and his buddy, his enforcer Gargata, tell a guy, another guy at a bar right on the state line, which is an interesting bar. It's called The Last Chance. And it was on half in Kansas and half in Missouri. And they said if there was gambling going on one side and Kansas City police came down, they pushed all the machines over to the Kansas side and vice versa. So it was that was kind of a cool myth about that bar. But yeah, they were down there drinking. It was a mob hangout. And they told Gargata or Binaggio, Charlie Binaggio had a driver, Nick Penna. And he told Nick, he said, you stay here. Charlie and I are got to run an errand. And they left. And next time they were seen, they were both dead on the floor at the Northeast Democratic Club, closer to downtown.
So you would assume now, again, by this point, there's a national commission, right? There's, I believe in 1963 there were I think 30-ish mob families in America, and there's this commission in New York. So you believe that they were probably behind that, the murder of Binaggio?
I think probably when he couldn't deliver. And there's a lot of suspicion that maybe he kept a lot of this money and didn't really put it in the election like he claimed, that probably they met and said, and told Kansas City, told Gizzo, Tony Gizzo was the boss by then, told Gizzo, you know, you got to do this is your problem. You got to take care of it. And that's what happened. As far as who did it, always a lot of supposition. Nick Civella was recently back from Chicago. He had, as a young guy, he had robbed some protected gambling games and got in Dutch with some of the mob guys. And he had gone to Chicago and was probably, best I could tell, maybe kind of taken under the wing of a guy named Charlie Cherry Nose Gioe. But anyhow, he was taken under the wing of an outfit guy because the outfit then brokered a deal with the Kansas City family for Nick Civella to come back. And he came back and he actually was driving Gizzo. He was Tony Gizzo's driver, which is a pretty important job in Kansas City and any major city, the guy that drives the boss around. And when this thing happened, some people claim that, well, that's how Nick Civella made his bones, or that's what really, you know, pushed him on to become the boss.
So
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it was more lower level guys. Kansas City would have taken care of it. They would have been told, you got to take care of this. This is your mess. You clean it up.
But the thought was that, you know, through the National Commission into Chicago, Civella was indebted to them. They were kind of, I think, maybe grooming him as the guy for them in Kansas City.
Right.
You know, they have Gizzo, who's kind of the old school guy. Once these two Charlies are killed, Gizzo takes over for a short time, couple of years, but he's essentially grooming Civella, who has kind of been handpicked by everyone and say, look, you're going to be the guy that's going to lead this family for the next 30-ish years. And by this point, as you said, you know, Civella is a pretty respected guy. He's got his own crew of people, and he is under the wing of a very large group, a much bigger family. Because I've heard a lot of FBI people say that for a long period of time, the thought was that Kansas City was more of like a satellite family of Chicago, essentially, right?
Yeah. You know, that's you always hear that we had our own discrete family, if you will. We had, you know, a pecking order. We had a boss. They did their own making ceremonies here, although I have never got anybody to talk about one of them. Two guys that know about them just look at me and give me this cross-eyed look like, oh, I don't know. But,
Do you
you know,
think
they know.
Do you think the making ceremony is probably very similar to the one we know of? You know,
everyone in every city, whenever anybody's talked about it and described it, it's almost exactly the same. And I'm sure it would be the same here. I mean, it's same kind of roots in Sicily. And so it was the same here. And there's no doubt.
Sure.
We don't have anybody that ever talked in Kansas City, ever. We've never had anybody that's really in tight, that is a made guy that's talked about anything.
And that's the thing about, you know, I think kind of the very interesting part we're in with what you do, what I do, is that we hear a lot of people on the internet discuss like informants and how they're bad people and we shouldn't hear from them. But as you just alluded to, one of the things that we don't know about Kansas City is these really insular practices that only people that were in that life would know. And no one's talked, so we don't really know.
Right.
And that's something I think we're missing out on. You know, there's always these insiders, but you know, a lot of them really aren't insiders. And you do your best with what you can get through being a law enforcement agent. But that's interesting. So Civella takes over in, let's just say, 1953, right? He's
something
in his
like
40s.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. He's in his 40s, respected guy. And the thought is that, you know, he's pretty young. He's going to lead for a long period of time. I want to ask you about, because you mentioned you're a young kid, right? You hear about the Kefauver hearings. And one of the things that really put the mob on kind of the front page in every American's household in America was Appalachian, right? You know, these big cars up in New York State and they're uncovered. Now, Nick Civella was at Appalachian. He's the boss at that time. And he's actually credited, I guess if you can credit anybody, there were various people. Some of them were caught leaving in their cars. Some escaped on foot, which Civella was one of them. He actually got about a mile away from Joe Barber's estate. He was located at some sort of elementary school, and he asked them to call a taxi for him. And they thought, what's this weird guy asking for a taxi? They called the police, and he's apprehended. But Appalachian was a bit of a show of force by Vito Genovese to say, hey, I am the boss, and this is our meeting, if you will. But it was very destructive to the mob because it would lead to a lot of things. But around this time, what do you know about Nick Civella's kind of, what does the city look like under his control?
Nick Sivella he was a smart guy, and he did not go out in the joints at night. He didn't run his mouth. He didn't brag. He had a brother for that. He had a brother named Carl. Everybody called him Cork because he'd pop his cork. He had a real explosive temper. He was out in the joints. He was talking to people. He was dealing with street people. Nick Sivella never ever, in later years especially, talked to anybody but his brother and his underboss Tuffy Luna and his driver Pete Tamburello. FBI agents would try to talk to him. FBI agents just go visit mobsters once in a while and just try to engage them in some kind of conversation and leave their card just in case. He would not speak to them. They'd walk up to him down at the city market, and he just refused to even acknowledge they were there. His brother, he'd talk to you. He'll get mad at you or whatever, but Nick would not even talk to you. And he was well read, and he was smart. So one of the early things he does in these 50s, he gets put on a Democratic Party nominating committees in Jackson County. It's still that way today. You got to be a Democrat to get elected. You got to say you're a Democrat to get elected, and all the way back. So he got on the Democratic Party nominating committee, and that's where he met Roy Lee Williams, and he cultivated Roy Lee Williams. He realized, hey, this is a union guy with some powers, got something going. I need to make him my friend. And so he cultivated Roy Lee Williams from that and created a relationship with him. So that's what Nick Civella was doing during this time. There were other guys out, of course, stealing stuff and fencing it and the usual kind of, they had a book going. Of course, back then they had a race wire going. Had a Jewish guy named Morris Snag Klein, called him Snag. His name was Morris Klein. He really kind of ran the race wire, and Nick and the other Italian mob guys hung out where this race wire was, had a little cigar. It's kind of like out of the movies, had a cigar stand inside of one of these old hotels, and everything operated out of there. And they had games around town, and they got a piece of the action of the games and the usual kind of mob stuff after Prohibition. And during this time, sports gambling starts coming in, and that they get into that, and he's overseeing that, because that's how his first real conviction since he was a young man. And I don't even remember what he had as a young man. He shot a policeman actually up in Chicago, and that just seemed to disappear. It didn't kill him. But they caught him on a telephone tap. One of the first, I think it was the first legal tap after the 68 omnibus crime control bill, where they legalized Title IIIs or wiretapping, and they put it on the Columbus Park Social Club or his social club. And he called in when the Chiefs were playing the Green Bay Packers, and it was so out of balance at that. Wait a minute, no, was it the Chiefs, the Packers, or the Chiefs and the?
I think it was the Vikings.
Chiefs and the Vikings. Yeah, you're the sports guys. Chiefs and the Vikings, and the books were out of balance. There was way too many bets, and he called in. Actually, Frank Tusa called him. I think he called back. Maybe anyhow, they stayed on that phone long enough to get some damning words that they could use to show Nick Civella was the man in control of the entire sports book in Kansas City, and that's where he finally took a conviction.
So, like all these guys before Nick Civella in Kansas City, the goal was, we control illegal rackets, bookmaking, loan sharking, extortion, all these card games and stuff. But we also want to create our power in the democratic world, the political arm. And that's something that, like, you just didn't see really around the country after like the 70s or 80s in the Mafia. It was just, they were an organized crime group, and that was it. The thing that made the mob so powerful in these towns, as you know, is the political connections. I saw at one point Al Capone had like 60% of the Chicago police force on the take. They had these people that control political arms. So Civella was no different. But I want to ask you quickly, what do we know about Nick Civella's business world? Because from what I understand, he had some sort of amusement company. He was a pizzeria owner. Where did he make most of his money? Was it mostly illegal enterprises, or we see a lot of these guys have legit businesses too?
Nick Civella, again, I have to reiterate how smart he was. He let other people do the rackets. he got a piece of that action, of course, and he divvied it up according to percentages of people who were made guys, but he got the bulk of it. And the family, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's like he and his brother had an older boy, Tony Ripe. So they had, and he had another brother, Carmen, and they had businesses. And Nick Civella invested in real estate. He had moved out to the suburbs, had, of course, grown up over in the North End, and as a young man lived in the North End, got married and first lived in what we call the North End, over close to downtown. Well, when they get money, like the rest of us, we move out to the suburbs. And he and his brother and his brother's son, his nephew, all bought 3 houses like right across the street from each other, right next to each other. And then his driver, Pete Tamburello, bought a house up there, and several other mob guys bought houses up in this one neighborhood. And then it's like the expanding suburbs. And during the 60s, the suburbs are really expanding. He bought real estate up there. He bought a whole corner, Vivian and Antioch, and owned, like a small shopping center up there, and had one was a club that he owned and his nephew run, and one was a barbecue joint that his driver ran, Pete Tamburello ran, and he ended up putting his kids to work in that barbecue joint. But Nick owned that whole big corner, and so he had a lot of rent coming in from that. He owned other real estate. His great nephew today, I was looking something up about him. His occupation is not real estate developer, but something to do with real estate. He's managing a lot of this real estate that the family had.
And you look back, it's probably money from very legal enterprises, but any smart gangster takes illegal money, washes it, and puts it into legal money.
Right.
And
right.
And look, I read in recently, Gary, to an ILA report out of New York City and New Jersey that today the International Longshoremen's Association on the New York waterfront is systematically controlled by a group of people that work for them. And guess what their last name is? Gigante. They still work there today. And I think that's what these old school guys did, is they created generational wealth through illegal businesses. And then, look at today, people that are last name Civella still in control of this stuff. And there's really no way to prove otherwise, right? It's probably illegal, but we can't really prove it. So Nick Civella is controlling large swaths of area. He's got real estate. He's got his people all living near him. He's really a very powerful individual. He's controlling illegal enterprises. But I want to kind of circle it back to you, because around the early 70s, you become a police officer for Kansas City. I want to ask you, what were you were a beat cop, I would imagine. How long did it take before you got into kind of the organized crime world? Because the 70s, as you'll talk about, was a very bloody time for the Kansas City mob.
Well, from say 71, I go to the streets, and I love the streets. I'm a young guy, and I wanted to be a cowboy growing up, and they give me a horse and a gun, and they gave me a car, Plymouth Fury, and a pump shotgun, and a Smith & Wesson 38 revolver. I mean, I was living the dream, dude.
And the car's a lot faster than a horse, so you're making out of it.
Exactly. We had a lot further distances to go, but anyhow, so I was living the dream, but I never forget, I saw this report. I don't remember, but it was to the intelligence unit. I thought, the intelligence unit, what is that? That sounds kind of cool. So I start asking around, say, oh, those guys, there's some secret unit. Oh, they only work on the big guys. Oh, so I said, well, listen, that's where I want to be. that's where the action is. But actually, it's not the action I had on the streets, but it was more my kind of action, the thinking and planning and plotting kind of action that I really like, and putting something together. So, I become a station detective, work on burglaries and larcenies out around the neighborhoods around the station, and kind of make my bones there, if you will, get a name out there and get involved in some different things that other people hear about. And then what's kind of interesting is my kid I grew up with, how you go to something like the intelligence unit is not easy, and especially in a smaller department. and especially in one that had this history of corruption. So they really vet people big time for the intelligence unit. And I had a guy I grew up with, Bobby Arnold. His wife worked with another woman whose husband was in the intelligence unit. He was one of the men that first started when Clarence Kelly, who was a former FBI agent, took over the Kansas City Police Department and cleaned up a lot of stuff after the 50s and into the 60s. Clarence Kelly formed the intelligence unit, which all major departments were starting to form them by then, and just to work on organized crime. It was kind of based on the top hoodlum squad that FBI, all the offices had created. So they formed the intelligence unit, and they were told to work with the FBI real closely, and they really were careful. Clarence Kelly was this, longtime old Kansas City resident that had been an FBI agent for 25 or 30 years and was highly respected, and his name stood for integrity, and he started choosing the right people for these kinds of jobs in the upper management positions. And then they were instructing you get the right guys in here. We don't want any bad eggs in this intelligence unit, because we work directly for the chief. The intelligence unit works directly in the chain of command under the chief's office. So he puts Ray Kinney and his partner Jimmy Doolin, two of the first guys they put in there, a couple of good farm boys, and they started learning the mob and learning who was who. They didn't know anything. Ray told me a story about how they just go down and hide a block or so away from the social club and start watching people and write down license numbers. They didn't know who was who, and said some old Italian guy came up behind him and says, "What you doing?" They said, "You watching those boys down there?" And so they said, "Yeah." And so he started telling, "Well, that's so-and-so, that's Black Louie, and that's Joe Comisano, and that's this guy, and that's that guy."
Wow,
that was the basis of the intelligence unit, how it really got started, their first database of names.
Boy, I wonder if Kansas City mob could get their hands on that little guy.
Really?
Wow, that's interesting. I never knew that.
Ray's wife worked with Bobby's wife, and Bobby and I grown up together. We both came on the police department, and Bobby was, I don't know, he was working someplace, and they had an opening, and I don't remember. He kind of knew Ray, but not really knew him, and so Ray got hold of him and asked him if he'd be interested in coming to intelligence. They wanted some new blood, some young guys. We only had about 5 or 6 years on. Usually everybody else had like 15 years on down there. So they brought Bobby down there, and then about a year later they had an opening, and Bobby knew I was interested. So he told his sergeant. Sergeant got hold of me and invited me to come down. So that's how I got to the intelligence unit. And I didn't really, I worked a lot of different, I was involved in loaned us out for homicide task force all the time as station detective. So I worked a lot of homicides, but as just one of the detectives that was handed a tip or a clue of some kind to go out and check this out and bring it back in. I was never like the case agent on a homicide, but I worked a bunch of them and some pretty cool cases, because we were always loaned out to any of the big deals. They would go snag what we call field investigators back into downtown to work and be part of a task force on any big crime. So I go to the intelligence unit, and Bobby and I, we partner up and we take off, and we go balls to the wall. We had these old guys. I even had one of them invite me out for a drink after work, after I'd been there about 2 months. And, "Hey, Gary, I'll stop over at some bar, have a drink." I said, "Well, sure." I was a big drinker back then. And so Lee Boy, we were talking, and he said, "Gary," he said, he kind of hums and haws. He says, "You don't really need to work as hard as you work." And I knew what he was getting at. I was making him look bad. So was Bob. I said, "I tell you what, man, I work as hard as I want to work. How I work is up to me. How you want to work, that's up to you." Right. He just like, "Oh, okay." They hardly spoke to us. Other they tried to play the dozens on us and put us down all the time early on. But we started coming in with some successes that they could not deny. Develop some informants and do some surveillances on our own, in which we were coming up with good, solid information, which everybody liked and knew was good information. So finally, they just had to leave us alone. And after that, and shortly after that, they got some different management in there and a different captain, and he really started working at replacing those old guys with people more of our age and younger guys, and everybody got a little more aggressive then.
So you're making your way. You're creating a kind of a reputation for yourself. And I want to bring up something. And I know you're pretty into this. So around this time, we've heard of the name Joey Gallo, right? In New York, he's got this Gallo group. He's trying to seize control of something. Well, Kansas City had essentially kind of a similar group, right? This group called the
Yeah,
Spiro Brothers. Tell me a little
right.
bit about them and some of the carnage that went on, because there were four brothers. They're kind of this upstart little group, and they essentially go to war with the mob in Kansas City.
They do. They do. The oldest brother, I mean, the oldest brother, Nick, they all grew up in the North End together, around each other. They all known each other, know each other's families. See, Kansas City's a small town. That's why nobody's ever really informed. Nobody's ever really testified or really talked about the inner workings of the mob, because if they find out about it, even if you leave town, you've got this extended family that you leave behind.
Right.
And like your, cousins are married to some others cousins. You see each other at funerals and weddings and other, the Italian fest and all that. So nobody wants to subject their family to this ostracism they're going to get if somebody has become a rat, if you will. So where were we? All of a sudden, I took a digression there, and I lost my train of thought. Jeff, Spiro Brothers, yeah, that's right, Spiro Brothers. So the Spiro Brothers, they're young guys moving up, moving into the Teamsters. They're, people take care of each other from the hood, shall we say, and they're getting Teamsters job. The oldest brother is pretty much a professional criminal, but he's willing to work as a Teamster too. And so they get him a job in the Teamsters, but he's also doing scores, and he's doing pretty good sized scores, in which the mob will get a piece of that. And he's real charismatic and real well liked, and he does not want to fit in with the larger group. He wants to do his own thing, and he doesn't mind paying them. He doesn't mind being connected to them, because there's certain advantages to that, especially back then. Even they still had some judges and some political connections up into the early 70s. Not a lot, but they had a few. And he's doing really good scores. They help him get a job at a truck dock. He kind of is moving on up and he's a business agent with the unions, working on the dock of this big truck, is a part of a national Yellow Freight, part of a national organization, truck organization. And he sets up a deal. He gets a truck of liquor stolen, which is, pretty popular item to steal off a truck. He gets a whole truckload stolen, and then he goes to management. He says, "Hey, I can get that back for you." And he got it back. So they're so happy. He pulls the wool over their eyes. They're so happy. They promote him. He's like some kind of a foreman, and he's involved with where they schedule loads, and he knows everything about, who the drivers are and what their loads are and where they're going and all that. And all of a sudden they start losing a lot more stuff after he gets promoted. They start figuring it out after 6 months or a year or so that, hey, and the FBI by then is, they're watching him, and they've gone to Yellow Freight and the security there and said, "Hey, this guy is ripping you off," and they end up firing him. But he's that kind of guy. He's that sophisticated a guy. He starts some other little businesses and like a soda pop company, and he goes around and tries to strong arm corner stores into buying his soda pop, which was some kind of RC Cola, I think, some kind of off-brand soda pop at the time. And so but he also, we're at the generation conflict in the 60s and 70s. Young people start, like today, they got tattoos all over themselves and piercings. Back then, they just grew their hair out long, and they wore these kind of flashy clothes. Well, Nick Civella, and I know this sounds stupid, but Nick Civella was rigorous about the dress code. Nobody had a facial hair. Nobody wore anything but mainly polo shirts and Sansabelt slacks, and they all and leather jackets in the winter. But they all looked like they wore a uniform, and he demanded that no facial hair whatsoever. Well, Nick Spiro he grew a big long Fu Manchu, let his hair grow out long. When he died wearing a pair of paisley flowered covered coveralls, or overalls, they call them, the bib overalls, but they were flowery, and that kind of thing. And he was even asked it's a great quote, he was asked by an agent as he saw that they were getting informants were saying, nobody trusts him anymore ever since he became a fucking hippie. And that's what they're saying to the FBI. People are bad-mouthing him. And an agent approached him one day, just on the truck dock, actually, from the report I read, and said, hey, how come you don't join the clique, the organization? They used to call them the clique back in the old days. How come you don't join the clique or the organization? He said, he said, those guys, he said, they use you up. He said, they use you like you're a jockstrap. They just use you and stretch you out until you got no stretch left in you. And then they just throw you away. And so that was the relationship between Nick Spiro. And believe me, when you set out to kill one brother, you better be ready to kill them all.
Right.
And they killed, and they approved, they had to approve of this murder. And one night in 1971 or 72, Nick Spiro is found in the trunk of his car north of the river and killed. And so, I mean, that was like, got Mafia written all over it. A mob associate, mob guy found murdered in the trunk of his car north of the river at the time, because they all lived north. It was within a mile of all our houses. So that was the beginning. And Carl Spiro, his youngest brother, is in the penitentiary for a jewelry robbery and a big heist on a whole truckload of suits that he had been involved in. And I don't know which one he was actually doing time for. Maybe they combined his sentences or something. But anyhow, he's in a penitentiary over in Kansas when his brother's killed. And he gets out about 6 months later. And he comes out and he's going to take up where his older brother left off. The other two brothers were kind of get along, go along guys. But they were Spiros. And Carl came out and he started, what he did, he started recruiting young thugs, young professional criminals, and saying, hey, come with me. We're going to move in on these Civellas. They got all this stuff going. And we want more. The Civellas, they controlled all the Teamsters jobs. They had the Skim going by then. This is like 1974, 75. The Skim was going. We had a whole bunch of other stuff going on, which would distract everybody. But there's another little mob conflict going on over some parking leases and some liquor licenses that were involved in and around Civella, but he wasn't really directly involved in that. But there was a murder out of that and some joints that were blown up. But the Spiros, Carl's out here and he's establishing his own organization, if you will, his own little gang. I talked to one guy. He was a Peckerwood or a non-Italian, and he was in the construction business, and he built basements for new housing projects. And Carl Spiro had a bulldozer after he got out. He's got in the bulldozer business, and so he was doing business with this guy. And this guy ended up being a drug dealer. As the drug business got big, he got into being a drug dealer and got killed. But this guy named Jim Farron, Spiro wanted him to join up with him and be part of it. And Farron told me, I interviewed him, and he told me that Spiro told him this and said, I've got a joint. He said, we got a back room. We can meet there. And, we're going to move in on these Civellas. And Farron said, yeah, I don't know if I really want to be part of this. And so if I could learn this as a, dog-faced detective, Nick Civella could learn this. And they kidnapped a guy who was a friend of Carl Spiro's named Johnny Brocado, who was an electrician. It was right after somebody threw a stick of dynamite it was a pipe bomb, set off a pipe bomb on the back door of the social club. It was like a let me scare the shit out of these guys on the inside kind of a bomb. And it did too, blew that door off, didn't hurt anybody, but it blew that door off while it was, jam-packed with people. And he was an electrician. And they were asking one of the coppers that were down there that night, the bomb guys, and the guy told me, he said, yeah, he said, one of those guys asked me, he said, could an electrician make a bomb like this? And Johnny Brocado is kidnapped and tortured not too long after that. And they find his body up north of the river, actually up at the airport. And same time, Spiro, he's got this other guy he's recruited named Leonard Krigo, who's a career criminal, never really spent more time in the penitentiary than he has out, but he's a bad dude. He's provided him a no-show job at a meat locker that his cousin owns. Spiro gets Krigo out, And Krigo ends up going to the Brandemeyer and Civella Meat Company. It was a guy partnered up with Cork Civella and owned a meat blocker, a plant that, you know, cut meat and sold it to small stores and things like that. And he also ran his book out of that, because Brandemeyer was a bookie. Leonard Krigo shows up one day when Brandemeyer's just leaving, and he's supposedly has like $10,000 on him, and he robs him and puts him in the trunk of his car, in Brandemeyer's own car. And Brandemeyer told the policeman when they took the report, this guy, you know, robbed me. He put me in the trunk of my car, and then he had two guns, and he started shooting into the trunk, and none of them hit him, but he started yelling, you know, tell Nick Civella the Arab's in town. The Arab, everybody knew that was this guy's, you know, Nom de Gear. His nickname was the Arab. And of course, he gets caught doing a drug house robbery about 2 weeks later, and they just popped him back to prison on his old original 20-year robbery conviction that they'd got him out on. And so everybody knows now that guy is with Spiro. Everybody knows that Spiro's cousin had given him a job, or supposedly a job, at his meat plant. And he robs Al Brandemeyer, Cork Civella's brother, and threatens Nick Civella. So, you know, the gloves are off by now. It was crazy during that time. They're running around stalking each other, and that was mainly our job, was trying to be in the area, trying to follow some of them, catch them stalking each other, and the bureau is trying to get hound dog trackers and listening devices in all the main guys' cars. They got some affidavits, and they got orders to do that. They never would work right. The hound dogs or the listening devices never could get them worked right before the big one went down. It was April of 78. There was this tavern that Carl Spiro was his headquarters. He was always there. And one night himself and his two remaining brothers, Joe and Nick, are there. And he's talking to his lawyer. He's on the phone talking to a guy for quite a while who we suspect is the guy that turned around and told somebody else to, you know, hey, make a call. He's down there at the Virginian right now. Somebody knew he was down there, knew all the brothers were down there actually, or somebody that had been in there. We don't know exactly who set him up. But while they're still in there, Carl's close to the front door on a payphone, and the two brothers, Joe and Mike, are sitting at a table, and three guys, masked guys, walk in the back door, and two of them peel off to the left where Joe and Mike are sitting, and just start shooting at them. They kill Mike and wound Joe. The third guy has a shotgun, and Carl is at the payphone, and he's glanced back to see what's going on. He sees what's going on. He books out the front door across Admiral Boulevard, which is about pretty good as a boulevard, is a wide street. And this guy with the shotgun runs out front and pops him just as he gets across the street, puts him down, but he doesn't take time to go make sure he's gone, and he only paralyzes him from about the waist down, but he'll never walk again after that. But it didn't stop him, didn't slow him down at all. But Mike's dead, so now there's only two Spiro brothers left. It's crazy. It was just crazy, and now everybody's stalking everybody, but initially everything just goes dead. You can't find anybody on the streets initially right after that, because that was, I mean, headlines, 6 inches high that night.
So during this 10-year period, 10-ish year period, there's a lot of bloodshed. There's a lot of bombs, dynamite, murders. Yeah. And during all this, Nick Civella is still running the mob in Kansas City. The Skim has started with his, his colleague, Tuffy DeLuna. They're making tons of money through their connections to the Teamsters benefit fund. We all saw that portrayed in Casino, right? If you've ever seen the Vinny Vella character, those guys, they're in that little, like Italian supermarket. That's essentially Kansas City, and that's portrayed the real people. So there's a lot going on for this group. What ultimately became of the Spiro brothers, and kind of talk a little bit about the Skim?
Like you said, it's during this time, this Spiro Civella war, that the Skim is really starting to rock and roll. They were able to get the 4 casinos that Lefty Rosenthal, the Stardust, the Hacienda, the Marina, and the Fremont. That was one stream of Skim. And Nick Civella during this time has this guy, a Sicilian guy named Joe Augusto, who is a relative to a Kansas City guy named Angelo Perello. Joe Augusto was, nobody's ever figured out Joe Augusto exactly. We think he probably was an illegal alien that took somebody else's name, but nobody could ever prove it. That Joe Augusto is the name he took. But they claim him as a relative. Perello's do. Because Rick Perello, who is a guy that's written some mob stuff in Cleveland, he's like a second cousin to him, and he remembers that the Perello family did claim Joe Augusto as their relative. Joe Augusto has somehow worked his way into the management at the Tropicana. He was just a real good scam artist, had been involved with some organized crime stuff and some extortions up in Washington State and some scam, some kind of a scam about some real estate up in Alaska. And he took he had one felony conviction for kiting checks, in which he was a master of kiting checks. So he couldn't get a casino license, key person license, but he was the manager of the Folies Bergère at the Tropicana, and they hired in a guy who was a longtime casino expert named Carl Thomas, and they set up Skim coming out of the Tropicana just for Nick Civella. So this stream of Skim, Nick got all on his own. He divided it up among his guys, and he sent a little piece to IUPA personally, just to pay tribute to IUPA personally. The other Skim was going on because they got the Teamsters loan, and Alan Glick let Lefty Rosenthal set up the Skim out of those 4 casinos and sent it back to Chicago, who shared a little bit with Kansas City, a little bit with Cleveland, and a little bit with Milwaukee. So that's all going on. That's one thing that I think the Sparrows knew about and felt like that, they should get maybe not exact a piece of the Skim, but they should be getting something, some more Teamsters jobs or something. And they were not. Nick Civella was notoriously not including anybody in on anything unless you're one of his close old school guys that have been with him a long time.
Let me ask you, do you think there would ever been an opportunity where, let's say the Sparrows said, you know what, we've done enough damage here, we're willing to begin to comply with you. We have our things, you have yours. Do you ever think they would have complied with them?
I don't think they could. Like I said earlier, you kill one brother, you better be ready to kill them all. Yeah, and by now they've gotten 2 dead, 2 killed. Joe jumps in the mix. This is when the bombs really start, other than we had some back in a couple of years ago in this other River Key thing. Yeah, that was River Key bombing. That took out a whole building. I think that was an insurance gig, but then they used gas on that deal. But they took out a whole building on that. But that was during this time of this whole River Key parking lot dispute with the Camasanos. But at this point in time, all that's in the past. They got a bunch of strip clubs down there in this entertainment district. That's what the whole war started over, was trying to keep the strip clubs out. And Joe Sparrow, he is bound and determined to take out Tuffy Luna, because it's his, and Carl Sparrow was on board with this. Tuffy Luna, the guy with the glasses with just a headshot there, he was supposedly the guy with the shotgun that crippled Carl. Carl was always really angry over that. He said, I wish they'd have just finished me off that night, but he didn't. He wasn't going to commit suicide. And they went to work to kill Tuffy Luna. They got a bomb made. It was pretty slick. I don't go into too much detail, but Carl Sparrow got from an old prison inmate that he knew somebody out of the penitentiary, went down to Arkansas and got a case of dynamite up here. And he had that same guy go to a professional thief named Bobby G. Jones, who knew all about electronics, could deal with alarms and things like that, had him make a remote control detonating device, put that with 4 or 5 sticks of that dynamite, and then gave it to Joe Sparrow, who had a couple of guys helping him. Carl Sparrow was insulated from the actual use of the bomb, except through his brother. Only his brother knew that he had put it together. We didn't learn this till later. Tuffy Luna always hung out at this one joint, the Villa Capri, which is the famous place where they actually planted the hidden microphone that was made famous in the movie Casino. In the wasn't really in that deli; it was in this Villa Capri restaurant where they all hung out. Tuffy always parked his car out front. Joe Spiro put that bomb in a brown paper sack and slid it underneath his car, and then stood down the street at one of his partners' taverns that was about a half a block down the street, stood in the doorway and waited till Tuffy came out, and then hit the remote detonating device. It was a model plane control kit that they used, and hit the detonating button on that, and it wouldn't go off. And so Tuffy just drove off and left the bomb sitting there on the street. They had to run up and get the bomb. It's funny, he made one of his guys go get the bomb. We know this because there was an informant, Kansas City police informant, that had gotten pulled into Joe Spiro's little conspiracy. And he didn't know anything but what dealing with Joe, but he was there that night. Then he was there the next day while they tested the bomb and found out that they had to be closer to it to make the servo motor work, make it move the lever that would close the connections. So they're going to try it again, and it's coming up to 1 year since that Virginian incident. And Joe tells him, he said, if we can't get it underneath his car and kill him, I'm going to put it on the front door of the Villa Capri, and we're all going to stand out in front with shotguns, and we're going to set it off. When they all come running out of the joint, we're going to start killing them as they come running out of the joint. He goes back to his copper that's controlling him, says, hey, here's what's going on. When upper management gets hold of that, they say, oh, it's over. It's over. We don't know where the bomb is. I know, but we're just going to make up search warrants for all their houses. And they've got this stolen car hidden over the East Bottoms in a truck line parking lot. We'll put search warrants. We'll put a surveillance on that. We'll put a hound dog on that stolen car so we couldn't lose it, and get search warrants for their houses and the joint that Conrad Metz, one of his other gang members, owned. And we'll just hope we can find that bomb. So next morning, and they've sat on this stolen car right next to it all night in a van with a hound dog, or the electronic sending device. So they serve the search warrants, and they find the bomb with the the electronic receiver right over about 6 inches from this hound dog device, which is attached up underneath the car. So it's sending out an electronic signal all the time, and that bomb is waiting for the right signal to hit it, so it'll go off. We're lucky we didn't accidentally set it off that night. Take them all down, and Joe ends up losing, getting convicted, and he has all his extra dynamite stored at a storage facility few miles away. He goes out there one day, and it blows up and blows off the whole end of the storage facility, his car, him, of course. So now the third Spiro's dead. Some people say it was an accident that he set it off. There's other people that have said an informant came forward years later and said, no, Johnny Joe Clee and George Bruton, these were a couple of mob associates, set him up out there. They put a bomb out there and detonated it, and then the sympathetic detonation from the bomb that they set off the dynamite inside the storage facility. Anyhow, he's dead. So Carl Spiro is still out here operating, and they've got more trouble than they can handle because the Skim trials are going on by the 80s. They're all, the upper echelon, and as well as Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland are all coming to Kansas City to go to trial. And they've got a lot of trouble. And the upper management, Nick Civella, dies of cancer by then, during that time, during the early 80s, while these other guys are on trial. They never stood trial for being involved in the Skim. And then Carl Spiro is just out, and he starts a little used car lot. And again, the bombing, somebody, he lives out in the country. I've got a wiretap where Carl Cork Civella is saying, he lives out there in the country. He said you can see for miles around. We can't get to him out there. We got to get to him at a club over in the city. They talk about buying a rifle, getting a 30-06 with a scope on it. Nobody can shoot that good, and they can't run up there across the fields because they're not in good enough shape, and all kinds of really cool stuff like that. It was a hilarious conversation to listen to. So they really can't get him at his house. We're following him all the time now because we know he's the last guy standing, and they've tried to kill Tuffy DeLuna with this bomb and failed, and they all know it. So we're following him all the time. Finally, we just let it go, back off. We can't do this forever. His nephew is staying with him. He comes out one morning, he sees something funny on his car. Carl Spiro's car has got those electronic or hand controls on it, and he liked to fly in their face. He has a license plate that says Spiro, and so this kid goes in and says, "Uncle Carl, there's something underneath your car." Let's go out and look. They could see something underneath it, and when you walk around the other side of the car away from the house, there's a wire going up, and there's a mercury switch attached to the side of the car. And the mercury switch is a little glass ampule with two wires stuck in one end of it. And mercury, if you touch it, jiggle it, it's going to move around real easily, and it'll conduct electricity. So as soon as somebody touched that car, that mercury is going to jiggle and is going to complete the circuit. And they had like 28 sticks of dynamite in that package underneath the car. Would have blown the whole end of that house out, and that car would have been blown across the street practically. It was his SDF agent that worked and said this is way overkill. Same time, about a month later or before, same kind of bomb was set underneath another close associate of Carl Spiro's, who owned a brand new car dealership, a Chevrolet dealership. He was a big gambler named Lester Moore, but he'd always provided stuff for Carl Spiro, always been his buddy. And somebody set the same kind of bomb underneath his car, and it didn't go off either. There's 2 failed attempts, and then, I don't know, a year or so later, finally, he's bought this little used car lot. He's there. We've got an operation going on him with the undercover copper with a booster that we got out of jail, a drug addict booster who buying stolen or buying stuff, and then they're selling it to Carl Spiro and also trading it for Dilaudid and drugs like that. And I think they sold him a gun. So they did a lot of stuff with him. They had a case or two made on him, several cases made on him. And somebody set another one of these bombs underneath that shack and sat up the street and waited till he walked in or wheeled in that morning when he came to work and blew it up, and it blew him and the wheelchair out through the roof and dumped him out in the lot. So that was the last man standing there, and that's the end of the Spiros. Not been a mob murder. No, been one mob murder since in Kansas City.
I'll tell you what, I mean, they seem like the tough guys, sure of that.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy, I did a show with Scott Bernstein a few months ago about Joey Merlino, and we talked about how Joey Merlino survived all sorts of different things, right? He's still here. It seemed with this guy in a way, and in the end, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So let's kind of understand where we are at this point. We're like mid 80s. Nick Civella's died. He died in 1983. His brother takes over Carl for a period of time. The Spears are out of the way. Tuffy DeLuna ends up going to prison, right? He goes there till about the late 90s, dies in 2008. And I've heard some really good wiretaps with him and Civella. But ultimately, a guy that takes over is a name that's pretty synonymous in Kansas City. This guy, Willie the Rat Comisano. And he's this old school enforcer, killer, got his nickname for leaving bodies in sewers. He kind of commands control throughout kind of the 90s. And then we get to a point where we kind of fast forward to today, right? Because he had a son, Willie Jr. He actually died recently. He was involved with the mob per se. One of the issues that I've had with when I talk to people like Scott is I've said over the years that, and look, you're the person that I'll ultimately ask, look, into like the 2000s, when would you say the mob almost went kind of away, right? Like when did that happen? Was it when Willie the Rat, ended up passing away, or when was it to you? Because he's kind of out of the picture by, let's say, 95. Yeah. Tony Ripe takes over, who's a nephew. He kind of assumes control for Pitt. Where do you say the mob is today, and when did it kind of fracture completely?
Well, during that time, they they just start reducing themselves. I think they were not maybe getting the recruits that they once did. There's still a book going, so there's still money flowing in from the sports book. So they've still got a bunch of gamblers out there, and they got a bunch of agents and, be it mob associates, and got a guy named Pete Simone that's kind of running the book for everybody, for the organization. They still are meeting some of the old guys. They still meet today, is my understanding, and I don't know what they talk about, but some of these old guys still get together today, like a bunch of us old coppers that work intelligence and agents. We get together too. But some of the younger guys tried to go into drugs big time. We just had a guy release a book that talked about that here, and it's out of Kansas City, called Mafia Dreams. And they started trying, and Willie the Rat's grandson, name was Tony Mike Nigro. His daughter married a guy named, Willie Rat's daughter Kathy married a guy named Nigro. He's one of the guys that ended up in the sewer. And Willie seemed to have killed his own son-in-law. Her kid, Tony Mike Nigro, he and some other young guys, young Italians, got involved in cocaine, but they just screwed it up. They just, he got caught real quick, but I think we got lucky too, and took him down real quick. They had a girl they were dealing with that was their connection to some Colombians, and she turned and she brought them all down, and a couple of their associates involved with that. One of them was almost like a serial killer. He'd killed 2 girls, and they all just like fell. All this next generation of young guys fell. They continued with the sports book. Willie Comisano Jr. had a bunch of, one of them was a Mortina. His dad was a made guy, and I think there was somebody else's son or grandson involved with that, at a sports book going. But the sports book was changing. People were betting online, and they had a connection with a Costa Rican company. Somehow they were taking sports bets in Kansas City, but dealing with a Costa Rican company. So all that gambling thing's changing too, and it's changed even more now. And people start dying off. The old guys are dead. I don't know what happened to the fencing. Fencing was a huge money maker for him. We had a guy that fenced all the stolen record albums. Well, record albums went to you can't really steal record albums anymore. No. Anybody, you can't really steal music anymore unless you're really sophisticated and make money. And just the stolen property, the main fence that had a big, almost like a decent sized store that was almost filled with all stolen stuff. He went to jail for a long time, and now he died. And I don't know what's taken. There still is boosters and places out there that buy this stolen property, and people that steal up rocks and that kind of thing. I just know what it is. Not a big money maker for them anymore. And they just kind of folded into themselves.
Yeah. Well, it's something we've seen that kind of around the country, right? A lot of these families that were once, pretty powerful for the area they were in, kind of go by the wayside, because a lot of these rackets, I mean, they just aren't. You can't go and extort Starbucks. You can't extort a Home Depot. So it's not a lot of these things. You mentioned gambling, right? In Missouri, gambling's not legal, but there's still other options, right? And that takes pieces of the pie. Rackets, as far as labor racketing, they don't have the same political connections. That's long gone. So you see all these families, these littler families, they're now defunct. You look at Chicago, once the huge criminal group. I mean, they're down to, probably under 100 people at this point. So it's just kind of the rules of things. And you mentioned, I just want to ask you real quick, you mentioned today there's still these old guys that meet. And one of the issues that Scott and I have had when we do these, like, what's the current state of the mob, I've said before, to call them a family is laughable, right? They're just a couple of old guys that meet. They're not real organized. As you said, you meet with your old cop friends to have some drinks or dinner. They may meet to talk about a couple of rackets, but is that considered a family? Probably not, right?
Yeah, probably not. Yeah. I don't know how you would define a family. I think they probably cling to some of the old days, but I think they also realize they don't, just like us, we don't really belong to an intelligence unit or the one squad anymore for the agents. But but they have those old connections. But as far as like getting together and influencing things, they don't have any political influence. They don't have the Teamsters. When they took the Teamsters away from them, that was almost a death blow to the national mafia in a way. That was huge for the mob when they lost that Teamsters union, and they lost it. They lost all, and labor unions are not what, there's, I don't know if there's hardly any unions left to corrupt even. That's a big base of power.
They did make a lot of money in the process, though. Feature films were made about them. I want to ask you two things before we wrap up and kind of move on. I guess in the national scheme, you mentioned how smart of a guy Nick Civella was. He had power for 30 plus years, made millions of dollars, was very powerful in the national scheme of things. Do you think Kansas City is one of the more underrated as far as violent families ever? I mean, because you hear about, look, I'm from the Philly area, I remember hearing about Nicky Scarfo and these wars in the 90s. We've obviously seen violence in New York with, Joey Gallo or whoever. But this is a really violent group, man. They're throwing bombs into places. They're blowing people's heads off in the middle of the street. Kind of just talk about Nick Civella's legacy. Where does he kind of rank? Because you always kind of want to rank these people. Is Civella a guy you put up on kind of the grand mantle? Like with do you put him with the Tony Accardos and the Traficantes and people like that?
Sure. He was one of those guys. He ran this thing successfully. If you think about it, he had just as much influence over the Teamsters Union as Tony Accardo did in Chicago, or I don't even know who was in Cleveland, or Ballesteri in Milwaukee, and really even more. He at the end, he was the next international president of the union. Was going to be, well, actually did get elected and then got indicted, was Roy Lee Williams, our guy out of Kansas City. So, he had that on a national basis and was, recognized on a national basis, to have that much influence over the Teamsters. I don't think you can, nobody really understands what a powerful tool that Teamsters union was for the mob, because it was the bank, it was jobs, it was political influence. I mean, you could get the Teamsters union to make $1 million cash donation to help elect the president of the United States, which supposedly they did get the pardon for Hoffa from Dick Nixon. So, it was, but then they lost control of that. But he had a big piece of that, was really influential on the national basis on that, in the Teamsters union. So, for that reason alone, I think he's really important up there on the same shelf as Accardo and these other guys. He just didn't have, we don't have the amount of people in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. He knew how to stay in his place and knew how to stay in his own lane. He knew how to get along with other families. I mean, he was good. Right.
Yeah, just a real powerful guy that we just don't talk about enough. So you ultimately would leave the police force. Before we get to kind of what you're up to now, I want to ask you just one quick question. There's a show that recently has been out over the last 5 years on television called Ozark. It's on Netflix. Yeah. And in the show, they talk about the Kansas City mob, and it's just this guy. He's not Italian. What do you kind of feel like? What do you think of those portrayals? Do you think they're kind of what the young kids would say, cringy or kind of goofy? What do you think of? What do you think of that?
It's hard for me to say because I know too much. But what they did in that show, and it was a pretty good show, really entertaining as heck.
Sure.
Was they had this mob boss in Kansas City, and he was connected to the trucking business, and he was investing money in the casino business. So they're kind of like taking real life things and putting them, kind of construing them into that storyline. So I had to appreciate that at least knew that the Kansas City mob had a lot to do with the casino business at one time, and would like to be in the casino business with somebody, and had interest in trucking, in the trucking business. So you like to say that for me, it's kind of like, it's cringeworthy. You just have to suspend my disbelief. For other people outside of, me, or people that don't really pay that much attention to it, I'm not sure. They may just take it on face value.
It's kind of something like when we see a film, like when I see a film, like some of these films are just goofy. Like some of this stuff, like when The Irishman came out, some of it was just not true. Like Frank Sheeran didn't kill Joe Gallo. Like it's just not. But one thing I found lame about that is like the guy wasn't even Italian. He was just some like Irish guy, It's like, but so you ultimately, what I find interesting about your career, Gary, and one thing that you kind of talked about is your intrigue has always made you kind of go to the next level of something, right? You're a cop, but you're intrigued by, you want to go into more, so you become a detective or an intelligence officer. Once you leave the police department, how long did you do in the police department?
25 years.
Yeah, so you do your service. You then kind of get into more, detective work. I'm intrigued by this world, and you create something called Gangland Wire. You have a podcast. You've done films about the mob. Now you essentially just tell the stories and provide content, crime content. Did I also read you passed the bar? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a lawyer. I am. I practice law.
You don't like to admit that, but you're
15 years. Oh, I'm kind of proud of it, actually.
I agree. Good for you.
I was a white hat lawyer. I sued. Of course, there's some people out here that don't really like this, but I sued buy here, pay here car dealers for poor people who had been screwed over.
Good for you.
Did a lot of traffic tickets and some divorces too. And my last police divorce, I did a lot of police divorces. My last one, I said, I'm never doing this again because I'll know both people and they'll both be mad at me before it's over. But I practice law.
That's pretty interesting, and good for you for sticking up for the little guy. A lot of not a lot of people do that. Those buy here for you car dealerships are scam artists. I also want to credit you. You did a lot of the early work in this genre. You put out a lot of content over the years. One of the things you did is you were one of the first people. I think you were the first people to interview Mikey Scars.
Oh yeah,
you interviewed him, and now Mikey's a big YouTube star with RJ, and they're doing their thing. But you've done some really great work. I'm going to put if you guys aren't familiar with Gary, which I'm not sure who wouldn't be at this point, I'm going to put all the links to his description in the section below. You've really, Gary, created a really nice kind of life for yourself, and something that it's not surprising that you do it because this is what you've done your whole life: investigate things. And I think we're happy to have you in this genre. Kind of just let us know what you're working on. Do you have anything you're working on currently, or you want to talk about?
No, not really. I can't do another documentary. That's done for that. I like doing them, but it's so much work and it costs a lot of money too to do it right. Mm-hmm. But I've always been able to break even, but it's tough. It's hard to do. But right now I'm just doing my podcast and that's it. I do have a 8-part. I really took a deep dive on Jimmy Chagra and the murder of Maximum John Wood, the federal judge down in Texas. So I've got I think it's a 6-part series on that. I've got a couple of interviews with people, more specific things, and then just other research that I've done myself to tell that story. So that's what's coming up next. Always, I find it fascinating. I do.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do, and I'm really appreciative that you came on and told us about kind of to be honest, unknown family for a lot of people. A lot of people know of New York or Philly, but it's nice to hear once in a while about another family. And we can argue whether they're still around, but a rich history, an interesting history, and a very violent history in Kansas City. Gary, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's good to finally talk to you, and we'll make sure we link some of your stuff in the description, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, Jeff. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thanks everybody for watching. As always, we appreciate Gary for coming on. We'll see you next week here on The Sit Down.